Defense budgets around the world are increasing at rates we haven't seen since the Cold War.
Trillions of dollars are flowing into defense companies amid rising world conflicts.
What we're seeing now is a rise of all these independent defense contractors.
But the biggest budgets aren't going towards tanks. The companies benefiting most are on the cutting edge of modern warfare.
These are all true disruptors.
Dylan Jovine with Behind the Market shares a list of 3 innovative defense companies that could all at least double in value.
This stock is really selling at a fraction of what it's worth.
What developments are behind the explosive growth of these 3 companies? Let's dive in. Dylan, so great to have you back on the show. We really appreciate having you on to talk about an area you are well versed in, and that's the defense sector. Right now, all eyes seem to be on the defense sector, and that's because of all of the rising tensions. Do you want to just break down for us kind of what the world is watching right now?
Well, thanks for having me, Bridget. It's always nice to come on and talk to you guys and your viewers. Yeah, it's interesting. The world itself, we see a lot of conflicts breaking out. You see Russia, Ukraine. You see, of course, Iran and Israel, and the United States, our involvement in that. And of course, you've seen the tensions between China and Taiwan vis-a-vis America. And, the headline is we've had a lot of peace, but the world is entering a new cycle of competition, a new cycle of war. Basically, you have a couple of powers, a few powers, specifically China and Russia, that want to revise the international order. China wants to put itself in the middle of the global pecking order. They want to take our place as the dominant world power. So that is really happening, and that has forced us to increase defense spending, and NATO now to increase defense spending. But it's a real thing.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of investment in defense spending all over the globe. It's not just the US, but it's everywhere. And I think all of these investments is where it's interesting for investors to pay attention to. It's not investments in new tanks. There's a new era of warfare. So talk a little bit about some of the areas of defense that are seeing the biggest investment and development right now.
So, basically, we're entering a new revolution in warfare. It's very, very exciting. It's the most exciting time. And I've been studying this issue for 35 years. It's really the most exciting time for an otherwise boring industry. And that's really driven by AI and what we call networked or distributed warfare. The warfare that we all grew up with, post World War II or US Soviet, was really massed armor warfare, tanks. You put tanks and you punch through lines. And here we're moving, tanks really don't work as we're showing in Ukraine. That's kind of the dodo bird now, because you can take out a very expensive tank with a drone that has a cheap gun on it, cheap missile launcher on it with a $1,500 drone. So tanks have been, and helicopters are kind of going, those are the yesterday's weapons. And right now, if you could imagine the Battle of Stalingrad or World War II, where you had hundreds of tanks fighting and all pointing in the same era. Here, we're now shifting to an era where you can imagine thousands of drones, like a swarm flying around the sky. All these drones are communicating with each other, communicating with a satellite, which is communicating back to home base. And they're all sharing real-time information, targeting and identifying target and kill information, all the time in real time. It's quite a revolution. It's astonishing, really.
And I know you have 3 names to share with our viewers today of 3 companies that you may not have heard of yet that are really innovating in this space of the new kind of warfare that you just described. Before we get to your list of these 3 companies, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about maybe some of those bigger names in defense, the names that everyone is used to hearing about when it comes to defense contractors. Are they seeing the same innovation, or are we seeing more of these smaller independent players playing a larger role in the defense spending in the US and around the globe?
It's interesting. You remember these are not your father's defense contractors. That's for sure. The world has changed a lot. After the Cold War, defense spending went down, and those Lockheed Martins and Boeings and Northrop Grummans, they bought all the smaller companies and really consolidated, and they became kind of these big, giant, slow-moving companies that don't innovate. And we saw what Elon Musk did, with SpaceX. He really revolutionized, basically how that's done. And he took that business away from Boeing and Lockheed Martin and all these other companies. because he just moved faster and did it better. And what we're seeing now is a rise of all these independent defense contractors that are completely different, that are tackling a lot of these problems in completely new and amazing ways, that are really starting to eat the lunch of these bigger competitors, which is astonishing and has created some amazing opportunities for folks.
Yeah, plenty of huge opportunities in the defense sector. And that's because there's really such a historic budget for defense spending, even just in the US. I know the video and the list you're going to share with us today includes some of the companies that could benefit from that increased spending. But you have a special report where you really dove into three companies that are set to benefit from that huge budget because Elon Musk and the president specifically handpicked these companies to help in our defense against China. You can scan the QR code right now or click the link in the description of this video to get into that report where Dylan and his team really deep dive into these three companies you won't hear today, but you can only find in this report from Dylan and his team at Behind the Markets. All right, Dylan, let's get to that first company on your list of three defense stocks that investors should really be paying attention to right now.
So the first company on my list is Elbit Systems. The symbol is ESLT. It's an Israeli company. The stock is trading at $425 a share. Don't let the high price fool you. There are rumors that they're going to do a big stock split, maybe even 4-for-1. So most importantly, this company is selling for below dramatically what it's worth. And I wrote some facts and figures down here. Revenue is $6.8 billion in 2024. That's up 14%. Operating income is 489 million, almost 10% to right there. And annual growth is expected to jump 20% as its huge $22 billion backlog kicks in. And, one of the things that President Trump has done is he's forced European companies to pick up a greater share of defense spending. Now, Europe itself doesn't make a lot of the weapons that are most important. So that means they're going to start buying stuff from companies like Elbit and the other two companies that I've talked about. We're going to see, a lot of potential growth. And, here's the really interesting thing why Elbit's a buy now. First of all, Elbit's involved in Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system, but they're really one of the keys for Israel's new Iron Beam missile defense system, which is really going to use lasers to knock down incoming projectiles. And Elbit makes lasers to do that, among other things, but they're really good at that. That's like a super core competency of theirs. And also, President Trump has pushed to get an Iron Dome. He's calling it a Golden Dome in America, too. We expect Elbit, all the companies I'm going to talk about today, but specifically Elbit, to play a very, very big role in helping us mimic what the Israelis are doing with their Iron Dome here in America.
And this one is a very interesting play and sounds like you said critical for that dome.
Absolutely.
Dome concept. I am curious, are we already seeing this stock starting to rise just in the last few weeks as
Yep.
there's been more discussion about defense stocks?
Yeah, well, all of these stocks have moved up. They've moved, down in the past few days, but because of it seems like the Israeli, Iran U.S. thing is not going to get too much hotter. Iran's telegraphing they don't want to really escalate too much, but long term, business is super good for these guys. Defense budgets around the world are increasing at rates we haven't seen since the Cold War. So there are trillions of dollars flowing into defense contractors, and there are a handful of small ones that are really selling the kinds of weapons that are going to determine which countries are dominant in the 21st century. And this is one of the companies.
Such a great point, Dylan, that there is just so much money and investment going into this area right now. There's a
No
lot of
doubt.
growth opportunities for these companies.
Super big, super cycle. It's a super cycle.
Well, that's the first name on your list. Let's get to the second company that you have for us in defense.
Yeah. And the second one is AeroVironment, and the symbol is AVAV. This one is also trading high. It's $189 a share. But again, we're talking about, basically the Palantir of drones. Okay, so this has a lot of room to run. They're becoming a drone superpower. And, America really, now this is a smaller company. In 2024 revenue was $700 million and net income was $60 million. So, but the Pentagon a couple of years ago understanding that we're moving to droned or networked warfare, really came out with something called Project Replicator, which means that, we want to wage war in a way that we can replicate a bunch of little systems, like think of bees, a swarm, or wasps or hornets. So this company has become, especially with the recent acquisition of Blue Halo, has become really the best positioned company with the best tech, winning the most contracts. And now that, again, President Trump has been pushing the EU to spend more money, NATO to spend more money, this company you see like every day, they've got a new contract to sell to Denmark, to Italy, and on it goes to all these European powers who need drones. And again, another big piece of President Trump's Golden Dome missile defense system for America. Very, very big deal.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what analysts have to say about this company and the upside potential, growth potential. That's what a lot of investors are looking for is that next big growth company, especially in defense. How much of an upside could a company like this one have?
Well, if it depends on how long you talk, but this is a double. Over. I mean, remember something. Their backlog is huge. It's growing, and they just made a transformative acquisition. So, an analyst that even does a conservative cash flow growth estimate is going to see this at about 370 a share versus 189 a share now. So, again, this is part of that new crop of defense manufacturers that really are changing warfare for the 21st century. Each of these three companies are revolutionary, and the third one is even selling for a lot cheaper. So just for the record, but all these three should be part of any portfolio, in my view, that really is interested in revolutionary defense tech. These guys are it.
Well, let's get to that third company. This one again, that lower cost buy, but still a lot of growth potential ahead.
Yeah, and this one is Kratos Defense and Security, KTOS, is around $40 a share. Again, another niche defense contractor. Drones, satellites, and hypersonic missiles, which are very, very important. Hypersonic missiles are very, very interesting because when you think of a normal missile, it just goes from point A to point B, and you fire it in the air and it lands exactly where you think. Hypersonic missiles are interesting because they can go up in the air, they can make a left, they can make a right, they can zig up, down, sideways. You can't really track them or defend against them. So they move at hypersonic, they're the fastest missiles in the world, and they move in ways that we don't, that are hard, almost impossible to defend against. And this company is really a pioneer in that area. Huge backlog, winning a lot of government business, up 17%, $1 billion in revenue. They did not have great net income last year, dropped to 6 million because of increased R&D, an acquisition, and some integration expenses. But this stock, as they normalize and integrate this acquisition, we see we see net income really going higher, and this stock is a double. Again, big time opportunities for all three of these. These are all true disruptors, true American and international Israeli disruptors in defense.
Yeah, very interesting names and ideas and concepts for really changing the way warfare is done across the globe. I do want to ask a few follow up questions on these innovative companies, these independent military names. Do you think that what the consolidation we saw after the Cold War, where some of the largest companies use their buying power to really consolidate and buy up these smaller companies, could happen again? Or do you see these smaller independent companies continuing on their own as standalone companies, or do you see maybe some consolidations and buyouts happening as this more defense spending continues?
Well, I'll tell you something. That's a great question. I hope they're not bought out. I think it's better for our national security if we keep a vibrant, independent, and very competitive defense field. Where a lot of companies are competing. Now you see you see companies like Anduril that are coming up, driven by entrepreneurs that are faster and more nimble, and you could have a company like these companies could be growing at 20, 30% a year, and you plug them into a Lockheed Martin and it's not going to make a difference. I'm hoping as a shareholder that these stay independent. I totally am hoping that. However, of course, they're very attractive takeover candidates. I mean, they're terrific takeover candidates. They have the technology. They have their finger on the pulse. And a lot of these big companies don't have their finger on the pulse anymore, unfortunately.
I think that's a really great point, Dylan, about the ability to adjust for these smaller companies as new innovations come out, new research and development happens. They can quickly pivot and adjust to what's the latest technology, what's the latest standards across the globe as we see more and more outcomes coming from these rising conflicts in different countries. And so I think that that's another important point to look at is, do you expect the developments to continue? This is the next wave of warfare, but do we even know what it looks like at this point?
Well, we do and we don't. No battle plan survives first contact. You know what I mean? It's like the old Mike Tyson line: "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face." But what a few things that we do know are, and Ukraine is really showing us this, and Israel with their drones inside Iran are really showing us this. What we're seeing is with Russian tanks coming in, cheap Ukrainian drones are knocking them out. So you don't want to spend a ton of money on tanks. Also, helicopters are just not fast or mobile enough. Drones could just, $1,000 drone, just fire a missile at a helicopter or a tank, and it's gone. So I don't see us spending. I don't see any wise country spending big money on systems like that. I mean, they're too vulnerable. So we do know that. We also know that lasers are going to be huge. When you think of, let's say, China, Taiwan, what if China took Taiwan, and this is a very serious thing because Taiwan controls AI. They make all the semiconductors for AI. So you can't really let that happen or we'd be choked. It's like modern day oil. But if we wanted to defend Taiwan, basically, if we bring a Navy ship there, we're going to be firing missiles at their incoming drones. China would just send in 10,000 drones. Our ships would just fire missiles at it until we run out of missiles, and then we're done. So how do you solve for that? The best way to solve for that are lasers. Lasers, you never run out of ammo, and they cost $1 a shot. So, think about that compared to, shooting projectiles at the drones China would send at us to get us to exhaust our ammunition. We'd exhaust our ammunition and we'd be, sitting ducks. So it's very, very important that lasers have to be part of it. So we know a few things. We also know distributed warfare, when everybody just all moves as a swarm, is harder to hit. So if China, let's say, or Russia or whatever, fired a missile at us, these would all move apart. They'd move apart, then they'd come back together and all fire at the target together at the same time. So we know that it's easier, it's maneuverability, and it's the same principle that Genghis Khan used on horseback. Just the speed of horseback, just confounded people on foot. This is the same kind of maneuverability and speed that is the key to success in warfare.
I love to hear your perspective, Dylan. I know you're a historian at heart as well. And so there's a little bit of that excitement of hearing about and comparing this to how wars of the past went. Excitement is a hard word to use when you're talking about defense and talking about warfare, because there's some real human cost in all of this. And so sometimes as an investor myself, just thinking about, I'm not thrilled that we're talking about defense so much because that's a little bit scary to think about the times that we're in. But I would love to hear your comments as we finish out this video just on how long you think this increased investment in defense spending could last. How long will we be in this kind of armament period where
Yeah.
countries around the world are working to beef up their defenses?
Look, we have entered, the post World War II era, where after the Soviet Union fell and the US was the dominant, what friends called a hyperpower for all these decades. That's over. China is trying to flip the international order. It's the Thucydides trap. They want to challenge. It's like a lion pride. The young lion wants to come and topple the dominant lion. This is the nature of it. So for us to stay competitive, I see defense spending increasing now that we're in this kind of Cold War with China. And what I'm hopeful for is, Ronald Reagan said, peace through strength, or Teddy Roosevelt said, walk softly and carry a big stick. The big benefit to me for increased defense spending, both here and in NATO and Europe, is that hopefully it dissuades anybody from wanting to start a fight with us. That's the idea, to show that we're the biggest, baddest kids on the block, and you don't really want to mess with us. So that's how I look at this, that every time we do this, it actually dissuades competitors or other countries from wanting to even get into a conflict. And to achieve that, you need to be a foot taller than your competition. Meaning in term, you got to be a 7 footer while they're 6 footers. That cost a lot of money. So we're going to see this stick around for years.
Well, thank you so much, Dylan, for your time diving into this topic that literally everyone is thinking about and talking about right now. You are so great at sharing your knowledge on this, and the names you shared also very interesting. I know Dylan has great advice for all of his regular newsletter subscribers. If you want to learn more from Dylan, again, we have that QR code and the link in the description where you can hear more from Dylan and some of the companies that he is researching more about and finding before they get that big swing or big uptick in the stock price too. Dylan, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching, everyone. Let us know which defense companies you're watching in the comments and what you think about the three names that Dylan shared here today. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Thanks again for joining us, everyone. As always, happy investing.